All right, this is going to be Yetta, page 103 to 110. This isn't working, Rahel said. Yetta's answer was to lean down and pull off a thick icicle from the bottom of a drain pipe that didn't quite reach the street. It was late November now, and the strike was still going on. That meant it was awfully cold on the picket line. Yetta thought maybe her toes were frozen, and she hadn't been able to feel her fingers for the past hour. But at least now ice was readily available, and free, for bruises and black eyes. She held the icicle up to her throbbing cheek, then shifted it to the knot on her head. "I'm not quitting," she said. Rahel sighed. "I didn't say we should," she said. "At least tonight I got away from the policeman before he put me in the paddy wagon," Yetta said, "so the union won't have to pay bail again." "Yours, anyway," Rahel said. "What about the other 20 girls who were arrested?" Yetta shrugged, which made her back ache where the policeman baton had hit her. Had it been Wednesday? Thursday? Last week sometime? She had bruises on top of bruises. It was hard to tell them apart. "We made the New York Times," she said. "Not just the forward, not just the call, the New York Times." She said this as though she knew all about the newspapers in New York City. How impressive it was to be noticed by a newspaper that rich people read, instead of just newspapers printed in Yiddish, or newspapers read only by socialists. She knew this only because one of the other girls had explained it to her. "But the New York Times mainly just wrote about Miss Dreyer being arrested," Rahel said bitterly. "Poor girls being arrested don't count." Miss Mary Dreyer was the president of the Women's Trade Union League, an odd group that Yetta had never heard of before the strike. It was workers and rich women all in the same club, which Yetta had a hard time understanding. But Miss Dreyer had left her limousine and her mansion and her furs and everything else she owned to come and walk the picket line with all the strikers. "I like Mrs. Dreyer," Yetta said. "So do I," Rahel said, but the police released her at the station right away. And Mr. Blank told the Times, "Oh no, there's no strike going on. And everyone in my factory makes at least $8 a week. Most of them make 16. Yetta was giggling now, even though it made her face hurt. He sounded like such a fool. Anyone reading that had to know that he was lying, she said. Rahel got serious again. "Not the rich people," she said. "Not the other factory owners. But we don't need them. We need other people like us, workers. The union meeting tonight better not just be a bunch of old men in fancy suits telling us how noble our cause is," Yetta said. "No," Rahel said. "It can't be." They had a quick cold supper at home because they didn't want to waste any coal or time heating up the stove. Soon they were back out on the streets. "How far is it?" Yetta asked, hoping her voice didn't betray how tired she was, how much her feet ached already. "Cooper Union?" Rahel said. "Just 4 blocks from Triangle." As they got closer, Yetta forgot her feet. There was such a tide of people moving towards the huge brownstone building. Men, women, girls, Jews, Italians, Americans. "There must be hundreds of people going to this meeting," Yetta marveled, as the crowd carried them into the building, down into the great hall and the cellar. "Thousands," Rahel corrected, her eyes glowing with something like pride. "Shirtwaist workers from shops all over the city. They're going to need other meeting halls for the overflow crowd. We'll have to have messengers going back and forth, telling them what the speakers say. Isn't it glorious?" She left Yetta near a pillar in the huge hall, with a good view of the stage. Yetta studied the arches that flared out from the pillars, the crowd packing in tight. She heard a girl behind her say, in awed tones, "Abraham Lincoln spoke here once." Yetta didn't know who Abraham Lincoln was, but that whispering just added to the electric energy in the audience. "We're like tinder," Yetta thought. "Just one spark. That's all we need." Rahel came back, her face flushed with excitement. "They don't need me to run messages out to the overflow halls," she said. "They've already had dozens of people volunteer." The speeches began. Except for Mary Dreyer, it was, indeed, all men on the stage. Well, really, what did Yetta expect? These were important men, famous men. Yetta knew that. Meyer Landon, the socialist lawyer, Abraham Cahan, editor of the Forward, Benjamin Feigenbaum, a union leader, and most impressive of all, Samuel Gompers, president of the American Federation of Labor. But after 2 hours of speeches, Yetta felt less and less like Tinder and more like sleeping. This is almost as bad as sitting at the sewing machine all day. Yetta leaned over to grumble to Rahel. Shh, just wait. Mr. Gompers is next, Rahel said. Mr. Feigenbaum introduced him, and the whole crowd sprang to its feet, clapping. Maybe they were just tired of sitting for so long. Maybe they were convinced he would finally say what they wanted to hear. Mr. Gompers stroked his bushy mustache, held his arms up to acknowledge the applause. A man would be less than human, he said, if he were not impressed with your reception. I want you men and women not to give all your enthusiasm for a man, no matter who he may be. I would prefer that you put all your enthusiasm into your union and your cause. All right, sounds good to me, Yetta thought, clapping as she sat down again. I have never declared a strike in my life, he continued. I have done my share to prevent strikes, but there comes a time when not to strike is but to rivet the chains of slavery upon our wrists. Exactly, Yetta thought. He went on and on. Most of the other speakers had spoken in Yiddish, but Mr. Gompers was addressing the crowd in English. Yetta found she had to concentrate very hard to understand what he was saying. And then she found that she wasn't always able to concentrate that hard. She'd listen, let her attention wander, listen again. She sat straight and listened intently, though, when he began to talk about what the triangle workers were already doing. This is the time and the opportunity, and I doubt if you let it pass whether it can be created again in 5 or 10 years or a generation, he said. Finally, Yetta thought. She had chills going up her spine, for she saw how it was going to happen. Mr. Gompers was about to tell the entire audience that all of them should go out on strike. All the shirtwaist workers throughout the entire city in support of the triangle workers in another factory that was already on strike, Lyserson's. A general strike, it was called. Everyone unified in the entire industry, not just at one or two factories. I say, friends, Mr. Gompers continued. Yetta was hanging on to every word now. I say, do not enter too hastily. What? How would this be hasty? But when you can't get the manufacturers to give you what you want, then strike, he said. And when you strike, let the manufacturers know that you are on strike. Have faith in yourselves to be true to your comrades. If you strike, be cool, calm, collected. No, 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 Yetta wanted to scream. Not cool, not calm. We're a tinderbox. We're explosive. Around her, people were standing up to clap again, but even the applause sounded puzzled. He hadn't called for a general strike. Not quite. He'd stepped to the edge and then stepped back. Mr. Feigenbaum was at the podium now, introducing the next speaker, another socialist, Jacob Pankin. Yetta had heard him speak before. She groaned. He'll go on forever, she complained to Rahel. What's the point of just listening to all this talk? Talk was nothing compared with the bruises and beatings and jail cells. Better that she should go home and get some sleep and be ready for picketing in the morning, rather than listening to all this hot air. But somebody else was rushing toward the stage. A girl. I want to say a few words, she called out in Yiddish. It's Clara Lemlich, Rahel whispered, sounding more awestruck than she'd been about Mr. Gompers. The striker from Lyserson's. Yetta had heard about Clara Lemlich. In the union, she was famous for her determination, her loyalty, her courage. She'd been in lots of strikes, but she was tiny. Hurrying down the aisle, she looked no older than Yetta herself. Mr. Feigenbaum and Mr. Pankin looked down at her from the podium as if to say, "You're just a girl. How dare you interrupt us?" Rahel surprised Yetta by yelling out, "Get her on the platform!" Others in the audience took up the cry. "Let's hear what she has to say. Let her speak." The two men stood aside, as if they had no choice. Clara's curly hair bounced and her skirt swayed as she climbed up to the stage. Her head barely reached over the top of the podium. "I have listened to all these speakers. I have no more patience for talk," she said, as if she knew exactly what Yetta had been thinking. "I am one of those who feels and suffers from the things described. I move that we go on a general strike. Now!" The room exploded with cheers. Yetta screamed too, each hurrah speaking volumes. "I am sore, I am tired, I am battered and bruised. This is just the help I need." And "A girl called this strike. A girl. We can do it. All of us girls together." Mr. Feigenbaum moved back to the podium, waved his arms to silence the crowd. He said, "Is there a second to this motion?" The crowd exploded again. Mr. Feigenbaum wasn't satisfied. "It won't be easy," he said. "Those who fear hunger and cold should not be ashamed to vote against the strike." There was a grumbling in the crowd, a grumbling against Mr. Feigenbaum, a grumbling against hunger and cold and the bosses who made it worse, a grumbling against all the men who ruled the world. "If you vote to strike," he said, "you're vowing to struggle till the end." "We will! Just let us vote!" Yetta yelled, and she wasn't the only one. Mr. Feigenbaum stared out at the crowd, his ancient, glittering eyes taking measure of their zeal. "Do you mean faith?" he asked. "Will you take the old Jewish oath?" Yetta knew the oath he was talking about, but she was surprised he'd brought it up. Girls didn't take old Jewish oaths. Oaths were the province of men. But she raised her right hand as thousands of others lifted theirs, other arms lifted into the air around her, and she chanted, with thousands of other voices, "If I turn traitor to the cause I now pledge, may this hand wither from the arm I now raise." There, it was done.